Hi, everybody. Welcome to this session. I'm Tom Christensen. I'm the Shotwell Professor of International Relations and the Director of the China and the World Program at the School of International and Public Affairs here at Columbia University. Delighted to welcome you to the 16th Annual N.T. Wang Distinguished Lecture. And I'm going to introduce my friend and colleague Scott Kennedy in a moment, but I first wanted to say a few things about the N.T. Wang Distinguished Lecture Series. It is hosted by the Weatherhead East Asia Institute, the Jerome Chazen Institute for Global Business here at the Columbia Business School, and by my China and the World program at CEPA. The Weatherhead East Asia Institute was established in 1949. It's Columbia University's leading Institute for East Asia. It's one of the leading East Asia institutes in the world, and it's been a major source of research for Asia, teaching and publishing on modern and contemporary Asia in particular. The Jerome A. Chazen Institute serves as the interdisciplinary hub here at the Columbia Business School for global business knowledge, and it brings together distinguished faculty with lots of actual business leaders to tackle and understand global business issues. And my China and the World program is designed to combine the study of international relations in a rigorous fashion with China area studies, and in addition to bridge the gap between academia and the policy world. And those are the three co-sponsoring institutions. I want to say something about the Distinguished Lecture Series. It's named in honor of Dr. Nianzi Wang, who is a professor here at the Columbia Business School for many years. I had the great honor of taking one of his classes. He was a wonderful professor, gave me tremendously useful advice on my first research trip to China in 1988. He believed in the Chinese economy very early on in the reform era and tried to convey the opportunities and challenges that his students would have in working in that economy. He was an incredibly generous soul, a very important person who spent a lot of time with regular old students like myself and gave us tremendous wisdom and advice. He created what's called the China International Business Seminar, which was a dialogue that brought practitioners and academics together. And his legacy continues in the N.T. Wang Lecture Series. And I want to welcome his daughter, Cynthia, who's joined us today. So now I'll formally introduce our speaker, Dr. Scott Kennedy. He is the Senior Advisor and Trustee Chair in Chinese Business and Economics at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. He's an amazing scholar. I became a part-time fellow, or part-time chair at CSIS in June, and one of the exciting things about that position is I get to join Scott and his amazing colleagues at CSIS. He's a leading authority, Scott is, on the Chinese economy. He focuses on China's innovation drive, Chinese industrial policy, U.S.-China relations, and global economic governance, among many other topics. He has a slew of publications. He has way too many publications for me to list, but I'll list three. One, because it's relatively recent and timely, and it's on managing U.S.-China tensions over the global economic order, and this was from late 2024. A second one, which is near and dear to my heart, was written with a former fellow at China and the World, Wang Distinguished, and it's called Breaking the Ice, the Role of Scholarly Exchange in Stabilizing U.S.-China Relations. And Scott, along with many of us, really believes that no matter how bad the political relations between U.S. and China get, it's very important to maintain those academic contacts. And then the third one is maybe related to what he's going to talk about today, and it's probably one of his more famous works. It's called Fat Tech Dragon, Benchmarking China's Innovation Drive. And that's a 2017 publication. Why do I point that out? Because Scott was studying Chinese technology before it was cool. He was on top of this topic. He knew it was important, and he's been tracking it ever since. He's really one of the most knowledgeable people I know on the Chinese economy and politics together, and on the domestic and international nexus. And finally, Scott Kennedy has been a champion of field research in China, and he hosts a podcast called China Field Notes, which talks to people who are doing on-the-ground work in China about the challenges they face with the changes in China at any given time. And I will now stop speaking and turn it over to Scott. Please join me in welcoming Scott Kennedy.
Tom, thank you for that very, very kind introduction. And I'm really glad that we somehow got you to come to CSIS. What I've heard, though, is that your work here hasn't been reduced. So I'm wondering how you're going to manage that, both of those things. And if you've got to make any sacrifices, Washington really needs your help, as you can tell. So, anyway, it's great to be here. I came to Columbia about 2 decades ago to speak at the Weatherhead Institute in its offices a few blocks south of here. And I think what happened is people forgot how bad that went. And so they're like, okay, I think now we can let's go invite him again. But hopefully that won't be the case this time. Columbia is one of the most important centers for China studies anywhere in the world. And I have learned from Tom and many of Tom's colleagues, like Andy Nathan, who is here, and Tom Bernstein, and many others, and many of their students, like Kelly Tsai, who studied here and is now at Northeastern University as a dean. Sean Xie is a good friend of mine who's traveled around the world doing things about civil society. And so I am a big fan of the university and all of its work on China. And of course, I want to thank the sponsors, the Weatherhead Institute, the Chazen Institute, and the China and the World program that Tom runs, for considering me and inviting me to this lecture. Of course, this is also a family event, and it's to celebrate and honor N.T. Wang, and I'm delighted that Cynthia is here representing her family. And in some ways, this brings things full circle as well. So I have a few family connections to Columbia as well. So in the late 30s, my grandfather fled Germany and with the rest of his family, and he ended up in New York. He was a physicist, and he studied at Columbia, and was an engineer and a business person. I have no engineering knowledge whatsoever. Hopefully, you won't see that through the talk, but anyway, so he was here. And then, of course, I have another cousin who just finished a few years ago at SIPA and is doing great things to help the world and the environment and everything else. So it's for a variety of professional and personal reasons, it's really an honor to be here. In fact, my grandfather, who worked on physics, in the mid-1980s became president of the IEEE. The IEEE is an association for electrical engineers. And they brought you things like Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is a standard that IEEE set. And in the mid-1980s, when he was president of the IEEE, he went to India and China to open up relations with both countries. And he came back in 1985 from this trip, and he called me up and he said, "Scott, study Chinese. I just was there, and you better study it." He didn't say study Hindi or Sanskrit. I think my life would have been really different if he had had that advice instead. But I'm glad he did. And lo and behold, once you go to China, you become addicted. And I've been trying to avoid a real job for 40 years since then, and so far I've avoided it. Anyway, we have all of the connections between all of us here in the room and Columbia. And so this means a lot to me to be able to come and talk to you about these topics at this school. What I want to talk about today is a puzzle that we have about China. And China is a place that is always puzzling and always surprises. And if you're no longer surprised by China, then you should stop paying attention to China, because it means that you're no longer curious the way you need to be. I think people here, let me tell you, see if anybody has heard of DeepSeek. Everybody has heard of DeepSeek. So, all right. Has everybody heard of China's demographic problems? Everybody has heard of that. You get this picture of China when you think about DeepSeek as this magical high-tech power that is running roughshod over the world, kicking everyone's butt, and it's going to be a superpower for as long as you can think. And China's on the rise. The rest of the world is going to be following in China's lead. At the same time, you hear people talk about China's graying population, debt, and all the different challenges that it has. And their view is, we've seen peak China, and China is on the way down. You shouldn't believe all of that advertising about DeepSeek and all of those things. And so there's this debate. You may have heard recently a book by Dan Wang called Breakneck. And Dan is running around the country and the world giving talks about how fantastic China's high-tech drive is, and that everything else is irrelevant. You may have heard of another scholar, Gordon Chang, who wrote a book, The Coming Collapse of China, in 2001. And he is still waiting for the coming collapse of China, but he's on Fox News every few days talking about it. And there are others who also are negative on China. So the puzzle is, how is it possible that we have these two competing images in our head of China, and how do we make sense of them? And so that's what I want to do with tonight's conversation with you. So I'm going to throw some ideas on the table that I and some other scholars have been working on to try and explain this contradiction. And so that's what I want to do with tonight's conversation with you. So I'm going to throw some ideas on the table that I and some other scholars have been working on to try and explain this contradiction. So my research method is here on the screen. It's called jet lag. I get on planes and I fly to China. I get off the planes, I get on trains, buses, taxis, DDs, and I visit companies. And I visit companies all over the country, and I've been doing this for a long time. Even when it's not popular, I went, even during when China was still going through the quarantine late in the pandemic, I enjoyed 26 days of quarantine. Actually, my wife enjoyed it because she got me out of the house. But I go and I visit, I interview companies, engineers, entrepreneurs, lawyers in China, and I go everywhere where Chinese do business as well. So I go elsewhere in Asia. I've been to Australia to visit Chinese competitors. I go to Europe, and of course around the United States, talking to people. And I guess what you'll see from these pictures is that I only have one suit. It's the one I'm wearing. I try to diversify my wardrobe, but I like this blue color. I think it's not so bad. But in any case, what I do when I talk to these people is try to understand why they have created their companies. What's their purpose? What are their plans? How do they analyze the market? And I try to learn about their technology and their operations, and if they're successful, why, and if they're not, why they are not doing well. And I do that again and again, because the only thing better than an interview with a company executive is the second interview with that company executive, and the third one and the fourth one, and repeatedly going year after year. As Tom said, in 2017, I published a report called The Fat Tech Dragon, which was based on a lot of these trips and interviews to companies all over China. And I determined that China was improving rapidly in technology, but with a lot of inefficiencies, a lot of wasted money. At that time, China was still growing relatively fast, and so I called it a fat tech dragon. It was not metabolizing all of that investment very well. So I've continued to look at Chinese companies since, particularly over the last year, and now I've decided that it should be considered a slow tech dragon. And the basic view that I want to put forward is that these two things are likely to persist for a very long time. This is not a transitional moment. This is a circumstance which China is going to experience for quite some time, in my estimation. And the world is going to have to deal with a slow tech dragon for quite some time. Now, taking those trips allows you to see China from multiple perspectives. You may go one day and things look cloudy and confusing, but if you go often enough, you get different points of view. And eventually, things look clear. And this is in Beijing. This is Guomao Tower number 3, looking across the east, of course. Now, I really like going to Chinese cities, but as you know, China is not entirely urban. It's a lot more urban than it used to be, but it's also highly rural. And for this work that I'm describing today, I've been collaborating a lot with Scott Rozelle, who's an economist at Stanford University. Scott and I, so we're the two Scotts in the field, I guess, who work on China. But Professor Rozelle and I, a few years ago, started a microsite at CSIS called Big Data China. And the purpose of that site was to take cutting-edge, quantitative, scholarly research on China and translate it into English. That is, take things which are written for other scholars that have regressions and equations and a lot of other math and explain that to people who are not in experts, policymakers, who don't have time or interest to learn that kind of stuff, but is highly policy relevant. And so CSIS and Stanford worked on that initiative for 3 years, and you can go see what we've done. And a lot of some of that work I'll discuss tonight, but there's also other work that Scott has done in collaborating with me that I'll share as well. So I'm half of a team sharing some of the results of our work tonight. You also, some of the work that we're sharing tonight, we wrote in an article that we published in Foreign Policy a few weeks ago. And so you can see some more of what we've said in that article. And if you find it paywalled or something, you can't get it, let me know. I'll send you the article. I'm happy to make it easier for you. I don't think I'll be violating, I won't be hurting FP's bottom line, I'm certain. So, all right. So let me try to first explain the technology side of China, and then the slow part, and then try to explain why they fit together, and then what the implications are for the rest of us. All right, so let's look at the tech dragon side first. And you may find that this isn't very, hard to believe, but if you are focused on all of the negatives and all the problems that China faces, then you might need to be persuaded. So, when Tom and I also first went to China in 1988. And when you went to China in 1980, it didn't look anything like it does today. Well, things have changed, in part because they have made an intentional effort to advance their technological capabilities at home and in collaboration with countries around the world. And part of that is measured in how much they spend on research and development. So this is data from the OECD that shows China is now second to the US in R&D spending each year. If you just looked at government spending, China would be number 1. But so much R&D spending is by companies in the United States, that's what keeps the US slightly ahead. At the same time, China has also moved up the ranks of innovation nations. So the World Intellectual Property Organization keeps an annual record of the innovativeness of countries around the world. They have 103 different metrics that they use to come up with these rankings. And China, when I first started looking at it, was around 30th, and now they are 10th. Much higher than India and Brazil, two other developing countries that China has totally separated itself from. And China is now third in the Asia Pacific, just behind Singapore and South Korea, ahead of Japan. And this is really the gold standard for overall measurements of innovativeness because of all these particular components that look at both the inputs to innovation, like R&D, as outputs like publications, intellectual property, sales, etc. So let's break this down just a little bit for everybody. So patents. The Chinese filed a lot of patents. Now, not all patents are the same. You have invention patents, which are the most important, followed by utility patents, and then design patents. Design patents seem to be the least important because in Germany, they don't even let you file design patents. But the Chinese, the number of invention patents the Chinese have been successfully filing have continued to rise. Even, and so that suggests that their quality is getting better. Also, if you look at what are called patents that are part of the Patent Cooperation Treaty, these are patents that you file in multiple jurisdictions, and the number of patents that the Chinese have been filing have far out surpassed everybody else now. This is probably an even better measure of the quality of Chinese patents, because if they're being accepted in other jurisdictions, it means that Chinese regulators can't just game the system easily. They might still be able to, but it's a lot harder when you've got to get multiple jurisdictions to accept your patent applications. If you look at manufacturing, China is now 29% of all manufacturing in the world. And so they're not just assembling, they are putting together and making and inventing products that have a high degree of domestic Chinese value added in them. So this is quite different from the way China used to be. If you just take one industry, electric vehicles, and probably you've heard about Chinese EVs, even though if you've only been in the United States, you've probably never seen a Chinese EV, because there's very few Chinese EVs on the road in the United States because they're banned. So, but the Chinese have been producing and exporting EVs for the last several years, and now they are the world's leading exporter of cars, ahead of everybody, including the United States and Japan. Some of those are internal combustion engine vehicles, ICE vehicles, but many more now are electric vehicles. And in China, half of all cars sold today are electric vehicles. Let me tell you a couple examples. This is the SU7 Ultra, which is from Xiaomi. Xiaomi never used to make cars. They used to just make devices like phones and tablets and things like that. But then they decided in the late 20-teens to start investing in electric vehicles. And lo and behold, they came out in 2024, in March of 2024, with the SU7. And then this year came out with the Ultra. I got to test drive the SU7 before it hit the markets last year. I went to their factory that had a test track around it. And they said, "Would you like to test drive it?" And I said, "Of course I would. What are you, crazy?" So they said, "Well, we'll drive it first." So I sat in the passenger seat. They took me around 0 to 160 kilometers an hour in 4 seconds. That was crazy. So we come back around, and they go, "Would you like to try?" Okay. So I get out. I go around to the front. I sit in the driver's seat. And I turn around and I say, I've been coming to China for 36 years. This is the first time I've ever driven a car in China. Are you okay with that? You have insurance? And they said, go ahead. So I'm here today, so everything was fine. So I didn't go quite as fast, but I went above this. Whatever the speed limit was in that neighborhood, around that track, is a very good car. How it's manufactured is also amazingly impressive because they've reduced the number of steps that it takes to make the car from what you would see in a traditional factory, and they borrowed a lot of ideas from Tesla and others to improve the quality of the motor and many other aspects of this car. While they were announcing their new vehicle, another IT company that makes devices, like the one in my pocket and in your pockets, Apple, they gave up their plans to make a car. But Xiaomi's went ahead. 2 months ago, I was in Shenzhen in southern China, across from Hong Kong, and I visited the world's largest EV company, now largest car company, BYD. They showed me around, and I got to visit, I got to try not just one car, I got to try 3. Including this one on the left, this off-road SUV, which had a drone on the roof, a DJI drone, which you might know is on the entity list, and you can't get a DJI drone here in the United States. But I started driving, we pushed a button on the screen, the drone flies off from the car, it's videoing us as we're driving around. It lands on the car while we're still driving. Push a button, it sends the video to my screen, all while I'm driving. Pretty cool. My Honda CR-V can't do that. Then I got in a sports car, and the sports car jumps. You push a button, it builds up a little bit of energy, and then it jumps off the ground. There was another car that I didn't test drive that swims. I'm not James Bond, 007, so I didn't need a swimming car. There was no water there, but this car can go through underwater for 30 minutes. It was not bad. So a car that's got a drone on the roof, a car that jumps, a car that swims. That's not bad. That's not bad. I can't do any of that stuff. And I haven't seen other companies do those things. But of course, that's just the show stuff. If you go into the factories, and you can learn a lot more about what they're doing inside, under the hood, that is extremely impressive. You've probably heard of Huawei. The US tried to slow down Huawei in 2018 and 19, putting it on the entity list, but it's not disappeared. It still exists, and in fact, it's now larger than it was before. And it's now making cars, it's making its own semiconductors, it's probably going to be the champion in artificial intelligence in China. So lots of reasons that I think China's tech trajectory is serious. You shouldn't underestimate their capabilities. But there's also real challenges and problems in Chinese technology efforts and in other parts of the economy, and those aren't going away either. So let me talk about the slow part of the slow tech dragon. The first is just the big number. This graph this is Chinese official data. China's slowing down, right? If you take unofficial data, it would show a steeper drop. But even with this, it shows you that China's economy has been slowing down from when it was growing much faster 20 years ago. You get a little bump after the pandemic, but for the most part, this has been a slowing economy. And what's really important for average Chinese is now the nominal growth rate is lower than the real growth rate. Now, economists want to know what the real numbers are, what the real growth rate is. But human beings live in nominal terms. You spend money, save money based on what prices are in front of you. And nominal growth now is lower than real growth. And so for your average Chinese person, it is a real shock to the system how slow the economy is growing. Again, you'll see lots of really amazing things, but also real problems. I went to S-Volt, which is a very good company in Changzhou and Jiangsu province, and got a full tour, 95% automated line of EV batteries. The CEO explained very clearly what their strengths and weaknesses were and what they're planning to do. They've got 10 amazing factories, 9 in China, 1 in Thailand. But there are too many EV factories in China. There's way too much capacity for batteries in China to go in the cars that they could sell in China or even export. So as awesome as I was impressed by S-Volt, they are producing, and battery companies in China are producing too many batteries. They have way too much capacity. And that's a challenge. After I finished visiting the company, I went to a shopping mall with friends, saw this Li Auto car there, which looked very cool. But Li Auto is one of 150 Chinese EV makers trying to sell cars. And then we were sitting in the Starbucks, looking across the street, sipping on our lattes, and there was an apartment complex, 20 beautiful high-rises, not a soul living in any of those apartments. Multiplied by 300 Chinese cities, and you've got a serious real estate bubble. That's a giant, giant problem. And that's, again, it's everywhere that you go that you can see that kind of problem. The word of the year this year in China is involution, Neijuan, which has this really arcane history of a term that's, you have to go down to Princeton to talk to anthropologists there who came up with this idea, but it's then been adopted in China. And it really is now basically means wasted production and overcapacity that exists in sector after sector. For young Chinese, involution's also been associated with an idea that working hard is really not going to bring you the benefits that you need. And so there's also this concept called lying flat. But in any case, involution is the word of the year. And where I went in China, all over the country, I ran into that. There's also, in addition to all of the successes, but overproduction, there's also failures. China's been trying to make their own plane for a long time, the C919, by a company called Comac, Shangfei, state-owned company based in Shanghai. Xi Jinping has put all of his eggs in the C919 basket. They've spent well over $100 billion, and they've delivered 16 of these planes. This plane is not very good. It's expensive. It really is not as good as Boeing 737 or the Airbus's A320 Neo. And everything that is in this plane that keeps it in the air is from here. There's nothing from China that keeps that plane in the air except the paint. And actually, the paint is imported into China as well. So this is a total failure. And the chances that the Chinese will fix this are very low. They're working on the drawing board a wide-body plane, and that will stay on the drawing board for probably ever. I think their chances of actually building a wide-body plane is zero. And so there's a variety of industries like this where there are severe failures. Let me mention one other, since everybody has one in their hand or pocket. The tip of that pen that you're using is called the nib. In 2015, Chinese Premier Li Qiang gave a speech where he mentioned how embarrassing it was that Chinese were importing good nibs from Switzerland and Japan, the only places that could make these things. So he offered up tens of millions of dollars in industrial policy support for China to come up with their own pen tips. Well, 2 years later, a company in Shanxi, Taiyuan Steel, came up with what they thought was the solution. Washington Post and others wrote great articles about it. Today, the Chinese are still importing the best nibs. So if you want a good pen in China, it's going to be an imported pen. The machine tooling required to make that tip really good is hard, and the Chinese had a very difficult time mastering that. So these are challenges. If you look at Chinese companies overall, because of all the wasted investment, the return on assets, even by private companies, has been going down, becoming closer to even state-owned enterprises. If you look at the amount of debt, which the Chinese call cumulatively total social finance, that has been growing as a share of GDP, now 300% of GDP. These aren't just physical things, these are also psychological changes that have been occurring in China. Chinese consumer confidence has basically plummeted over the last 3.5 years. The precipitous for that was the lockdown in Shanghai in April of 2022, and since then, it's been like someone had a heart attack and never woke up. It has been this low, and these are Chinese numbers. So it's not like someone else coming up with this. This is even in China, them showing this. Chinese are very worried about their future. They don't have enough healthcare support. Education is expensive. They're worried about war with the United States or over Taiwan or something else. This is their rainy day. They are saving their money, and they are not buying. In addition to that, Chinese sense of the system has changed dramatically. And so this is work that Scott Rozelle has done with a couple colleagues that show changes in attitudes in China about reasons for why people are wealthy or why they're poor. So they've done 4 surveys, and the first 3 that they did in 2004, 2009, and 2014, they asked people, why are you poor? And the typical answers that they got were, I'm not very smart, I don't work hard. They're blaming themselves. Now, just in 2023, when they asked them, why are you poor? They said, it's the system. There's unequal opportunity. It's not about me. The system now is rigged against me. You ask them, they also asked, why, if you're rich, why do you think you're rich? And again, in the past, they would cite their own attributes. I'm smart, I work hard, things like that. Now, it's connections. It's an unfair unfair system that they know how to manipulate. These are fundamental changes in Chinese people's view of the system. And these have long-term effects about people's interest in work, the type of jobs that they do, the effectiveness of economic policy, etc. These are long-term changes that you see. And they might be related to the pandemic, but to as well as other changes in Chinese society. Something else that Scott Rozelle and his colleagues at Stanford emphasize that is critically important to China's economic trajectory is human capital. Now, you all probably encounter the best parts of Chinese human capital because they're students at Stanford or professors at Stanford, or you go to big cities in China and companies, et cetera, and Chinese officials, and you meet super smart people. But that's only a small section of China. That's the 400 million Chinese. That's a lot, but China's 1.4 billion people. There's 900 million other Chinese who don't have these skills. Only a small portion of Chinese finish high school. Only a small portion of Chinese are able to have the jobs of the 21st century in factories which isn't just about assembly, but where you need to make complex judgments about what you're doing. These are people who cannot work in the gig economy except riding a Meituan bike to deliver stuff to you. And if you're in China, you encounter those Meituan bikes all the time. They've got electric motors now, so you don't hear them. And when I'm walking down the street, I'm constantly in danger of losing my life being run over by one of these things. So this human capital problem is potentially decisive because there is no country that has ever escaped the middle income trap with China's composition of human capital the way it is. Now, maybe China will be the first, and in many areas China is the first, but it would be the first, and so it's unexpected to be that way. So I've tried to show you that you've got a high-tech, amazing China, and that China is also growing slow. Now, how do those two things fit together? Let me see if I can pull all this together for you. For the most part, the reason that this is occurring, why we have these two circumstances simultaneously, in Professor Rosell, in my judgment, is very simply a misallocation of resources. You've got a lot of money being invested in things which generate some returns, but not the returns that they should generate. And a lot of money is not going where it needs to, and so you are wasting an immense amount of resources, just as I wrote in 2017, but that problem is even bigger now because China's economy is so much larger and is a much larger share of the global economy, and because China should be taking off, and it should be broad-based success in China. Now, one big question about this misallocation of resources is whether this reflects some sort of physical constraint. Is there only so much money to go around and all of it's being bet on tech and none of it is and too little is going to education and healthcare and things like that? Jean Oy, who's Scott's colleague at Stanford, that's her argument, that this is basically a guns butter trade-off. Our view is that actually this is just simply a political choice. This is just this leadership's preference for how they want to spend money. Even if they had more money, they would not spend it on rural China. They would not spend it on helping people get better high school educations. They would not spend it on early childhood education and prenatal care. They believe in focusing on tech as the source of Chinese growth, which is both an economic issue for the leadership as well as a national security issue. And as relations with the US get worse, that pushes them to put even more of their eggs in the high-tech basket and less in other areas which would support broad-based growth. So in our view, this is a political choice. If China wanted to, right now they have 300% debt to GDP, they could go to 400% or 500% if they wanted to really spend this money. There's no magical number by which you get debt to GDP that you get a financial crisis. So this is a political choice in our minds. And if you look at the new 15th five-year plan idea that came out last week, is still the choice that they're making. They're still going to put their eggs primarily on high tech and not these other things. So what does that mean for us? Just a couple implications, and then I'll end, and apologies for going on a little bit long. These problems, the good and the bad, are going to be with China for a long time. As long as they maintain this strategy, they're going to make a lot of successes in tech, a lot of failures in tech, and they're going to have a slow economy with a lot of inequality. That's the kind of China that we could see for a long time under Xi Jinping's leadership. At the same time, China is going to continue to be interdependent. The idea that China is going to achieve self-sufficiency and not need anything from anybody else, that is a mirage. That is a full-on fantasy. And they are going to be interdependent with the rest of the world, which means that it is going to be complicated to manage the relationship with a very powerful China, but not impossible. It's going to require some diplomacy and some skill. If you look at Washington, where I live and work, You might think that there's not enough skill and capability to manage this relationship, and every day I go home wondering what the heck we're going to do. But if we're smart about it, we should be able to manage this relationship without decoupling from China, without going to war. We've got enough smarts and leverage and capability, despite the fact that this is going to be a difficult relationship. And in fact, if China were to fix these problems, they might even be more complicated to deal with because they would be more successful, have less of the domestic challenges that they face, and have it easier for them to call the shots. So in some ways, a slow tech dragon may not be easy for us to deal with, but the alternative wouldn't be a piece of cake either. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Scott. It was a great talk. And I'm going to ask Scott a few questions. I want to tell the audience that we're scheduled to end at 6, but we don't have to. So we can run over, and the audience can ask some questions as well. I'm an international relations person, so I'm interested in all the stuff you talked about and how it affects China's foreign relations and countries' policies towards China. So I'm going to ask you a few questions along those lines, and I'm sure people will be asking questions that are purely domestic. And my first question is, how do these factors that you talked about here today and in your excellent article with Scott Rozelle in Foreign Policy affect foreign governments when they think about de-risking or even decoupling from the Chinese economy? Does it encourage them to do that? And how do those things interact with the foreign policies of countries that interact with the Chinese economy?
Sure. I think what we've seen over the last decade is China pursuing this strategy, which in many ways is successful for China, but not for other countries, right? They are using both industrial policy and which includes lots of subsidies, and we've done the math on those subsidies, which add up to a very, very big number, far more than anybody else, and technical capability. So they both are subsidized and high quality. And that generates outcomes which challenge everyone else. So that leads countries to worry both about their industrial competitiveness and jobs, and for many of these products, the national security implications, right? So if you think about Chinese EVs, they are not just EVs, right? They are a cell phone on wheels, right? They are collecting data, transmitting data, right? Everywhere you go, they're connected to other elements of your tech world. And I guess there's a question, do you want all of your data going back to Beijing or to Shenzhen or wherever? And so the US government decided no. And so we actually, in January this year, the Biden administration issued a rule on connected vehicles and autonomous vehicles and said essentially that Chinese vehicles can't be in this market for national security reasons, in addition to the 100% tariffs we already have on them. So what you're seeing is countries around the world adopting these kind of de-risking mechanisms, whether that's about data security or technology, and that is generating real tensions between China and the rest of the world. And of course, the Chinese have realized that they've got some leverage too. And so what we are seeing is an arms race of economic security measures between China and others, most recently around rare earth elements. And we've decided to dispense with all the rules, right? So I don't think anybody's here seen the word WTO in a New York Times article in a long time because no one's paying attention to WTO any longer, right? So what are we going to use to manage these issues with the Chinese and the rest of the world? What we're doing is we're going to the back alley and we're just using whatever weapon we've got at the time. And so we've got a lot more chaotic global situation, so we are de-risking, thinking that the less connectivity, the better, and we are abandoning the rules. That to me suggests a lot of tensions coming. It means that we are not anywhere near any kind of equilibrium with the Chinese, and someone is going to have to adjust, and that's what they've been negotiating over the last several months, and that we'll see in a few days if they've come up with anything. And then we're going to actually not only figure out how to adjust, but come up with some rules to manage the relationship.
Thanks a lot. So another thing that I've noticed, a lot of people exaggerate the degree to which the Chinese economy is export dependent. I think traditionally people have exaggerated that factor. But in the last few years, it does appear that export growth has outstripped other types of growth and has provided a big percentage of the growth rates that the lower growth rates that you've discussed. And last year in 2024, China had a trade surplus with the world of over $1 trillion US, which has never happened in human history. And my understanding is this year it's going to be even larger still. So I guess my two questions related to that topic are, do you think this is sustainable? In other words, will people keep absorbing this many Chinese products around the world? And second of all, how do the domestic problems that you lay out so well in your paper and in this talk impact the Chinese tendency to export so much outside world in order to maintain growth?
Sure. Well, the problem that I just described during the talk about excess capacity, this isn't the first time China's had that problem, right? So this is probably the fourth or fifth time since you and I have been going to China that we've seen this. In the mid-1990s, there was a big problem just before the Asian financial crisis. You saw it in 2003 and 4. You've seen it multiple times. Now, originally, it was like in steel and cement and those kinds of things. And now it's in electric vehicles. It could next come to semiconductors, legacy chips. The Chinese have a bunch of fabs that have under construction. And so there's always been a tendency because of China's political economy, I used to say step on the gas, but since it's not a gas pedal anymore, it's an accelerator. They step on the accelerator for production, and production goes up. They step on that other one that says consumption, and nothing happens, right? And the political incentives for officials has always been about generating GDP numbers, right? And so the production is super important. And so as a result of China's moving up the value chain and becoming larger, we're now noticing this at a $1 trillion level. So this is a cyclical problem, because as China does that and the world is not growing as fast and demand is not growing as fast, that gap, China produces 30% of the world's manufactured goods, as I showed you, and they consume like 15%. That gap is that $1 trillion. And what we are seeing right now is a lot of countries imposing restrictions, anti-dumping measures, countervailing duties because of subsidies. But still, so far, Chinese exports are rising in general. To us, they're down 25% this year. But to the rest of the world, they're up even more. So in fact, for 2025, as you said, the numbers will be good. But that number cannot go up much longer. And in fact, last year, exports were probably 40% of the growth number that they got for 5%. This year, it'll probably be just 10%. And so, because you just can't continue to expand that net exports amount. So they know that this is going to have to come from consumption if they want to continue to grow, or they're going to need to play golf like me, which is to use that eraser and put in the number that you want. It's a real challenge.
2 digits don't fit in the box.
That's right. Thank you.
So this relates to another issue which people complain about, which is overcapacity. And I've been speaking to a lot of Chinese business people here at the business school in recent years, where they have programs that bring them in. And it's not just foreigners who complain about Chinese overcapacity because it produces goods that the importing country believes are being produced below cost, but also the involution problem that you discussed. Chinese businesses feel like they have to produce, and they're not making any money on the production that they're making because the profit margins are so thin or negative, but then they pump this stuff out into the world. So this overcapacity is a big problem for the foreign consumers of Chinese products as well as for Chinese businesses at home. And there was a recent article by Lizzie Lee in Foreign Affairs, which was kind of provocative and new to my mind, because usually you think of overcapacity as a result of central government subsidies directly to factories around the country, saying you must produce this kind of stuff. There's no market for it, and then they just pump it out into the world at below market prices. But she argues that it's actually not central subsidies. She says there aren't subsidies. She doesn't really call them subsidies at all, but at the local level, it sounds like subsidies because of incentives to local firms. So the central government says, build a lot of this type of stuff. Our country needs it. So it would be a great power, will be technologically sophisticated, build this kind of stuff to all the local officials. And then the local officials tell their businesses to produce that stuff and provide incentives for them to produce it. But she argues they do that for a specific reason, which is that local governments depend on value-added taxes, VAT taxes, and VAT taxes in China are collected from the producers, not from the consumers, which is unusual around the world. So if you're a local government official and you want revenue, you have to have production in your area. And it doesn't really matter if that production is profitable or not, because you're going to get value-added tax from that factory when it produces anything. And that's going to help you run your government. And with the real estate market in shambles, the local governments can't rely on real estate to fund themselves. So this is her argument. And it seems like one of those single variable, I've cracked the code. I found the key weakness in the Chinese system. And you have a lot of different moving parts in your analysis with Scott Rizal. So I want to ask you, how do you respond to the Lizzie Lee article? What does she have right? What did she leave out? And how would you adjust her argument in foreign? This is in foreign affairs,
Yeah.
very recent foreign.
Well, I like Lizzie a lot, and she writes a lot of good things, and the data that she's got in that piece is helpful. The challenge is that the overcapacity problem, or this tendency to have cycles of producing too much, has been there beyond the time that they've had this tax system in place. Okay. So if you go back before they had value-added taxes as a primary source of revenue for local governments, they still had this problem. So it is a mechanism to generate this kind of behavior, but it's not the underlying source of this tension. Which is, you have Chinese companies which have access to credit.
Yeah.
And so with those soft budget constraints, we go back to Janos Kornai from the 1980s, that's the problem.
And it sounds like a subsidy, right? I mean, it is a subsidy.
It is. If you get debt, if you get credit that you don't have to pay back,
it's a subsidy.
Yes, that's the problem. That you don't have the discipline of failure enough for enough of these companies, and you have too much access to credit. And I think at the fundamental level, what you need is actually more gatekeeping on market entry, and then you need more help getting companies out of the market when they fail. Mm-hmm. So China's got a bankruptcy law that's been around for a couple decades. The number of bankruptcies have been going up lately, but still nowhere near what they could be, and the way that they handle the assets and distribute those is still insufficient. SOEs oftentimes aren't covered by some of these. I might ask Ben Lieben from the law school to help me with some of the legal sides of that analysis. But in addition, China has very low concentration of industry. So if you look at the number of firms that have, say, most of the market share in China, it tends to be quite fragmented. And that's because many firms can survive long after they should have been done away with. And so you need to encourage mergers and acquisitions, greater consolidation in industries, and that will help. So if you do have better regulation on markets at entry and at exit, I think even if you keep the tax system the way it is, I think you get probably less of these huge volatile cycles in production disassociated from whatever demand in China is.
Thanks so much. So I want to open it up to the audience. I don't want to dominate the whole discussion. And we have two people with microphones. So if you could wait for a microphone to get to you if you have a question. We have one up front here. Daniel? And please ask a question. Yeah.
Hi, Frank Kale, Columbia, 81. I'd like to introduce the policy of the Belt and Road, which seems to be pretty firmly in place, and how, if at all, it has an effect on these issues that you've raised. Is it relevant, or is it just a separate sector that doesn't come into questions of, for example, education of Chinese, which I'm stunned is whatever it was, 12th out of 12. So,
Yeah.
Belt and Road and the issues that you point out that are problematic.
Okay. So just to explain to everybody very briefly, the Belt and Road is a policy that the Chinese came out with in 2013. Originally, the idea was China's moving up the value chain. It's becoming less capable in labor-intensive industry, and it wants to offload those to others. It wants to open up markets elsewhere around the world, and so the Chinese government will start encouraging Chinese companies to invest abroad. Chinese Exim Bank, China Development Bank will provide a bunch of credit to these companies, and that will also sort of lock in production, business, profits. You can use that as diplomatic leverage, et cetera. So that was the policy. In some ways, the Belt and Road is kind of like a Christmas tree. It's many different parts of the Chinese bureaucracy have decided they wanted to use it for something, and so they've hung their own ornament on it, and so it's actually evolved over time. Since 2017, 4 years after it was started, it's become less relevant. If you look at the overall numbers of Chinese outward investment and credit abroad, it's gone down. And the reason, very simply, that it's gone down is China's domestic financial situation has gotten a lot worse. It got worse first by their housing and crisis that they had in 2014 and 15, then the stock market crisis they had the following year. And so as a result, the Chinese leadership said, we're going to give a lot less abroad. So you have heard about projects in Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Africa, and other places, Belt and Road projects. And there's like 60 countries that are Belt and Road countries. But the amount of money behind these things are pretty darn small compared to total Chinese investment or the scale of these sectors overall. So I think Belt and Road's written in the Chinese constitution, so they've got to continue to mention it. But in terms of like having real mojo behind motivating Chinese policy or affecting their technological capabilities or their ability to have others inside their tech ecosystem or compete with us, the Belt and Road is really just an advertising sideshow these days.
Go ahead. You decide, Julie. Just go to the people with the hands.
I think most people here do have hands.
So one of the key areas of the U.S.-China tech competition is AI and semiconductor chip manufacturing. I was wondering, I think you're probably one of the most well-knowledge China experts here in the U.S. You had a lot of great exposures to the Chinese entrepreneurial community. I was curious, kind of your personal takeaway, sort of where China stands on both fronts versus the U.S. in terms of AI talents, in terms of sort of where China stands potentially catching up with the U.S. on advanced semi-chip manufacturing.
Sure, great question. And like most of my answers, I tend to end up, it's a mixed picture, and I don't settle on one variable. As you noted, difference between Lizzie and me. But if you think about AI broadly, there's several components of it, right? The AI technology stack, right? From having raw materials like rare earths, and then your semiconductors, and the equipment that makes them. You then need telecom equipment. You need data. You need applications and devices that run that data. That's a lot of segments, right? And the Chinese are good at almost every one of those segments. I think everyone knows they got the rare earths, right? And they've got the devices I showed you, Xiaomi. And there's a lot of Chinese companies that work on algorithms and services. And in terms of talent, the Chinese are way ahead. Like the number of folks in China that work on AI and the number of folks in the United States that are from China that work on AI in universities and companies and labs is an amazingly high number. China's biggest weakness is in what they call compute, the hardware side, which is what you're probably the core of your question, the chips and the chip equipment, the most advanced chips. And the Chinese have invested a lot in chips and chip equipment at the cutting edge, but they are still behind. In terms of equipment, they desperately are still dependent on ASML, the Dutch company, and Tokyo Electron, and American companies for that equipment. And even though Chinese company that is a manufacturer and tries to make these equipment has tried to come up with technologies that are different and homegrown and not dependent, they still can't hold a candle to these foreign technologies. And that's why actually China's biggest import increases the last few years, even though that's trade surplus, has been semiconductor equipment, right? In terms of the chips themselves, they've made some progress. And I went to a Chinese semiconductor maker last year, and they were hurting. The US government had restricted their access to equipment, and the foreign staff that worked for those suppliers had to get up and leave. And what they told me was we had to go from being cooks in the kitchen to being farmers in the field. We had to go from using this stuff to actually becoming masters of the equipment. And it was really hard for them. But this year when I saw them, they said they'd figured that out. They now know how to plant fields. That is, they now know how to use that equipment. And the quality of their chips has improved. I'm not going to say specifically who they are, but nevertheless, they've gotten better. But there's some areas where the Chinese still are behind. I think most people in the news these days are about GPUs, graphic process units, basically the chips that are used for artificial intelligence that NVIDIA dominates, 94% market share globally. The Chinese have come up with some alternatives, including Huawei, which is probably had the most successful, their Ascend chip, but they still can't compete. They're still not as good. The Chinese government has said everyone should buy local now. But this is a type of strategy they've used a long time, for many years, and what companies are doing is they're buying those chips and they're putting them in the corner. They still would rather have NVIDIA chips, and if they can't get the NVIDIA chip, what they're doing is going online and using cloud services outside China, which are based on NVIDIA chips to run those inference models and develop. So they're still behind. They still are dependent. I would say the overall competition in AI, I think my bottom line answer is no lead is safe. Because even if you don't have the compute, they have all those other advantages and strengths. So, but in chips and hardware, they're still trailing.
Hi, my name is Tanya. I'm a first-year student at SIPA. I'm also the assistant editor of the Asia Pacific Journal that is housed under the Weatherhead Institute. And I have a question in reference to Mr. Hale's question on the Belt and Road Initiative, because do you think your answer would possibly change given the recent USAID cuts? Because there has been a lot of evidence that China is using this investment strategy of theirs to get soft diplomacy or get that soft power in the international world standing. And if you take Cambodia as an example, they've been using a lot of strategic investments in critical regions. And in Cambodia, it's a great South China Sea partner in ASEAN, and also their airbase and just geopolitical location makes it a very good investment strategy using Belt and Road Initiative, but also from a humanitarian soft power perspective. So in that aspect, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think my expectation would have been yours beginning this, that the U.S. has closed down USAID. It's giving up all of this leverage. There's a vacuum. I'm the Chinese. Let's just fill the vacuum with our capabilities and whatever business diplomatic benefits we would just accrue. But not necessarily. So in addition to me getting on airplanes and getting jet lag, I participate in a bunch of track twos. Sometimes those are in China, but we host them as well at CSIS. And so we had a conversation with Chinese. We've had these meetings with this group of Chinese for 10 years. And the longer you have the meetings with the same group, the better the conversations get. The first year, but it gets better and better. And in May, when we were in Washington having the conversation, this exactly came up, and I'd be happy actually to send you some of the data. We surveyed everybody in the room. Wasn't this many people, but it was still really interesting. All the Americans gave your answer. they're going to fill the vacuum.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
But no,
And then when we ask the Chinese, no, we're not going to do that. Why are we not going to do that? Because we don't need to, because you're not doing it, so we don't need to compete with you. And plus, we don't have the money. So why would we do it anyway? Because we're not competing. So I think it's just simply, the real answer is just an empirical question. Just go look around and see how much money the Chinese are giving out. Is it gone up? Where are they investing it? And I think it's just an open question. But I think what I heard from the Chinese is that we're not going to fill that vacuum because we don't need to compete with you. And so I don't know if that's something
Yeah,
that
I would just say one thing about it is that USAID was giving aid, and the Belt and Road is not aid. It's loans, and they expect to be repaid. So to move in to replace USAID, you have to start giving aid. And I think China's not really ready to do that. Sometimes Belt and Road is pitched as aid domestically and internationally for diplomatic purposes, but in fact it's not. China gives very little aid. One more, can Adam ask a question? He's been very patient.
Thank you, Professor. I'm Adam. I'm a current student of Professor Christensen.
Wow, that's how you introduce yourself?
I'm honored. Yeah.
I'm a former student of Andy Nathan. He's over here.
I'm honored in general. At the beginning of the year, I read a foreign affairs piece by Rush Doshi and Kurt Campbell, and they discussed about how America is falling behind China in scale, particularly in economic security levels, in that for America to compete with China on scale, they need to use allies in the region as force multipliers. My question is, in light of how you say it's a political choice for China with how to spend their resources and the misallocation, in your opinion of that, how does this clash with the entire scale argument? And do you think America is currently going in the right direction with that?
Sure, great question. And you have great professors who have great professors. And one day you'll be a great professor, and then you'll have professors, and someone else will be in that chair asking this question. Rush Doshi, who worked with Kurt Campbell in the Biden administration, he's now at Council on Foreign Relations in the Washington office, even in New York. When I read their essay, my immediate reaction was very scientific. Duh. Like, of course you need scale. Of course you should be collaborating with allies and others around the world. China doesn't have that coordination problem, right? They get to decide everything themselves. I mean, domestically, there's certainly a lot of challenges to get everybody on the same page. But the US and its allies have a giant challenge. And so collaborating, even though our market is quite large and quite powerful, and denying access to our market, which the Trump administration is using, he's got a lot of people on many sides of the negotiating table now. A lot of people said, well, you never would, but of course he's doing that. We don't have all the technology ourselves. If you look at semiconductors and AI, we are collaborating with the Dutch, the Japanese, the Taiwanese, and others. When we were collaborating with others very closely, the Chinese hated that. They really were upset by that. That was a signal it was working. So we need to reemphasize that. I think Washington now, depending on the day of the week, when it's Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, they're like, let's collaborate with allies. On Tuesday and Thursday, they're like, let's screw them. And on Saturday and Sunday, it's like, we'll go think about something else right now. We are at a minimum, highly inconsistent. And so, of course, if you think about allies, then you might have to think about what they need. You might have to think about finding common ground with them, which isn't achieved through punching them in the face. And that is very uncomfortable for this administration to be willing to do. If you look at how they're treating Canada, Japan, South Korea, and others, it doesn't look like we're close to getting on the same page in a voluntary way. I would say that the importance of scale, it's not just that, it's also what it's directed toward. And I think that the Biden administration, when Rush worked there with Kurt, basically bought into the idea that the smaller the relationship with China, the safer we were. And I think that applies much of the time, but not all the time. I think we can also use scale to effectively compete and be connected to China in ways that are to our advantage. It isn't necessarily just, as David Sachs, who's in the administration now, says, making them addicted to our chips. But we do want them in our technology ecosystems, right? And you have to do business. And those ecosystems are multinational in character. In addition, we also have to think of a strategy to not just play good defense and protect our technology, but open markets. And so the Biden administration did a terrible job of offering market access to the United States in exchange for overseas. So I would encourage scale, not just for defensive measures to protect yourself behind some barriers, but for becoming more assertive in promoting American technology abroad and expanding connectivity and interdependence with others, which I think actually brings significant national security benefits to us.
Okay, well, I want to say that this was a great session. I know we have to wind it up, unfortunately. And I wanted to say that when we invited Scott, we knew it was going to be a great session, and he's proven that it was. And I just wanted to say, I think the honoree of this lecture series, N.T. Wang, would be very satisfied with what happened here today. And he was our mentor, our colleague, and our friend. And I think you honored him today with your excellent presentation. So please join me in congratulating Scott.
Terrific.